It was August 12th, 2024 in Hillsborough, North Carolina, New Goloka. We're reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 53. Krishna kidnaps Rukmini. Text 42 to 43. Nanopahara Bali Bir Vadamukya Sahasrasha Shraganda Vastrabharanayar Dvijapatnya Salankrita Gayanchastuvantascha Gayaka Vajyavadakaha Parivarya Vadum Jagmu Sutamagada Vandina Nana various upahada with paraphernalia of worship Bali bihi and presence Vada mukyaha prominent courtesans Sahasrashaha by the thousands Shrak with flower garlands Ganda fragrances Vastra clothing Abharanai and jewelry Dvija of brahmanas Patnyaha the wives Swalankritaha well ornamented Gayantya singing Cha and Stutvantaha offering prayers Cha and Gayakaha singers Vajyavadakaha instrumental musicians Parivarya accompanying Vadum the bride Jagmuhu went Sutta bards Magadha chroniclers Vandinaha and heralds. BBT translation. Behind the bride, this is Rukmini, going to the temple of Durga. Behind the bride followed thousands of prominent courtesans bearing various offerings and presents, along with well-adorned Brahmanas' wives singing and reciting prayers and bearing gifts of garlands, scents, clothing, and jewelry. There were also professional singers, musicians, bards, chroniclers, and heralds. Purport. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti explains that from her own quarters up to the temple of Bhavani, Rukmini went by palanquin, and thus was easily protected. Only for the last 12 to 15 feet from the palace to the temple area did she go on foot, with royal bodyguards stationed outside the temple on all sides. I'd like to read from Krishna book. So this is a little bit from yesterday's verse and then today's verse, because it's kind of mixed. In the meantime, Rukmini, being very nicely dressed and protected by bodyguards, came out of the palace to visit the temple of Ambika, goddess Durga. Deity worship in the temple has been in existence since the beginning of Vedic culture. There is a class of men described in the Bhagavad Gita as Veda Vadarata. They believe only in the Vedic ritualistic ceremonies, but not in temple worship. Such foolish people may here take note that although this marriage of Krishna and Rukmini took place more than 5,000 years ago, there were arrangements for temple worship. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says, Yanti Deva Vrata Devan. The worshippers of the demigods attain the abodes of the demigods. There were many people who worshiped the demigods and many who directly worshiped the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The system of demigod worship was directed mainly to Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, Lord Ganesha, the sun god, and goddess Durga. Lord Shiva and goddess Durga were worshipped even by the royal families. Other minor demigods were worshipped by silly lower-class people. As far as the Brahmanas and Vaishnavas are concerned, they simply worship Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the Bhagavad Gita, the worship of demigods is condemned, but not forbidden. There it is clearly stated that less intelligent men worship the demigods for material benefit. On the other hand, even though Rukmini was the goddess of fortune, she went to the temple of goddess Durga because the family deity was worshipped there. In Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, it is stated that as Rukmini proceeded toward the temple of goddess Durga, within her heart she always thought of the lotus feet of Krishna. Therefore, when Rukmini went to the temple, it was not with the intention of an ordinary person who goes to beg for material benefits. Her only goal was Krishna. As Rukmini proceeded toward the temple, she was silent and grave. Her mother and her girlfriends were by her side, so that's yesterday's verse. And the wife of a Brahmana was in the center. Now that's interesting because it's not stated specifically in the verses or in the commentaries. Surrounding her were royal bodyguards. Parentheses, this custom of a would-be bride's going to the temple of a demigod is still practiced in India, close parentheses. As the procession continued, various musical sounds were heard. Conch shells, drums such as panavas, and bugles of different sizes such as turiyas and berries combined to make a sound which was not only auspicious but very sweet to hear. Thousands of wives of respectable brahmanas were present. So that's very interesting that Srila Prabhupada's connecting the word thousands to the Brahmins' wives. With all dressed very nicely with suitable ornaments. They presented Rukmini with flower garlands, sandalwood pope, and a variety of colorful garments to assist her in worshiping Lord Shiva and goddess Durga. Some of these ladies were very old and knew perfectly well how to chant prayers to goddess Durga and Lord Shiva. So followed by Rukmini and others, they led these prayers before the deity. Okay, and I want to look just at Srila Sanatana Goswami's purport, which is basically the same as Srila Jiva Goswami's, and as Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's was quoted by the BBT. I'm not going to read that one. So Srila Sanatana Goswami says, the best citizens, now this is interesting, because Bhanu Maharaj's translation basically is just a repeat of the BBT translation. And do you remember in the BBT translation, who were the best? The best of the courtesans. However, Srila Sanatana Goswami is saying this Vara Mukhya refers to the best citizens. Came with various gifts and articles of worship, Bali Bihi. The singers sang and the sutas and others praised. Stuvantaha, the musicians played instruments, understood but not written in the text. So if there are musicians that play instruments, they were playing instruments, even though that's not stated in the text. And of course, that's what Srila Prabhupada picks up on in Krishna book. Nano Pahara Bali Bir Vara Mukhya Sahasra Shaha Swagandha Vastrabhara Nair Dvija Patna Solankrita Gayantyas Cha Stuvantascha Gayaka Vajyavadakaha Parivarya Vadum Jagmu Stuta Magda Vandinaha. Behind the bride followed thousands of prominent courtesans bearing various offerings and presents, along with well-adorned Brahmanas' wives singing and reciting prayers, and bearing gifts of garlands, scents, clothing, and jewelry. These were gifts for whom? For Durga, yes. There were also professional singers, musicians, bards, chroniclers, and heralds. So yesterday, Leela Shakti talked about the importance of protecting women. And I thought it would be interesting today to talk about some of the positions of women in Vedic society, because I believe this is very grossly misunderstood often by our Hare Krishna devotees. That somehow we have an idea that the way women acted in Vedic society was the way women were living in America in the 1950s. And that it's just such it's so out of sync with what's actually described in the Shastras, that kind of a conception. So here we have actually 4 categories of females. We have from yesterday's verse, we have the mothers and the friends. So what Varna would they be in? Kshatriyas. These are Kshatranis. These are Kshatriya ladies. And then today we have that she's going with all these Brahmana women, which Prabhupada uses the Sanskrit word for thousands in the verse to refer to the Brahmana women. And then we have these other females, Vara Mukhyaha. We'll try to figure out who in the world they are. And then we finally have Durga, a demigoddess, a female demigoddess. So we have women from all of the Varnas, and then we have ultimately goddesses. So we're going to look at each of these in turn. So these Kshatriya women, interesting, mothers is plural in yesterday's verse. So not just Rukmini's own mother, but other Kshatriya ladies who were like her mother. Perhaps her father had more than one wife, or maybe these were the wives of her, maybe these were like aunties, or other mother-type figures in the royal household, people who had a motherly relationship with Rukmini. It could have been female teachers as well, could be in that categories. And then her friends would be other princesses, other royal ladies, again from her father's brothers, their children. These cousins might have also been in this category. So what do we find from the Shastra that these royal ladies are doing? Anybody can think of something from Shastra? They're not just sitting around like getting fanned and looking beautiful. That's not what they're just doing all day. The queen takes care of the treasury. Yes, in fact, Draupadi tells Krishna's queens at Kurukshetra when they meet for the eclipse, she says, I am the only one who knows the income and expenditure of the government. And when you think about that Maharaj Yudhisthira was the emperor of the world, that would be very significant. So she was like the secretary of the treasury. Yes? Yes, so we find that even today, right, in the United States, that the First Lady often takes care of the guests and the diplomats and managing all of the functions. And of course, they knew diplomacy. What's our indication from Shastra that these Kshatriya women knew diplomacy? Where Prabhupada specifically says that. Rukmini definitely knew diplomacy. But there's this place where Srila Prabhupada says specifically, with Devaki, when she's bargaining with Kamsa and asking him not to kill the girl. And Prabhupada says that she knew the arts of diplomacy. Right? So the Kshatriya ladies were also involved with diplomacy. And they were often saving situations. We think about Bali Maharaj's wife who comes out, she interrupts even Lord Brahma to talk to Vamandev to try to negotiate for her husband's release. Yes, and Draupadi also tells Satyabhama that she was managing the whole royal household of 100,000 people. Now, they were also very much kept up the proper mood of management in the society. Prabhupada talks about, when he talks about the mentality of the Kshatriyas, he gives the example of a woman, how the king comes home from battle and he comes to the outer gates and he tells the guards, he said, tell my queen that I have arrived and that she should let me in. And Prabhupada says that the guards go to the queen and they say, your husband has arrived. And she said, oh, he has won the battle? No, your majesty. Is he gravely injured? No, your majesty. Then he's an imposter. Tell him, don't let him in. And so this message is given back to the king. If you haven't either won or gotten gravely injured, you're not going to be let in. And so he goes back and wins the battle. So the Kshatriya women also have a Kshatriya mood, and they're contributing to that sense in the society, and often they encourage the men to actually take up their royal responsibilities. Then we have the Brahmana ladies, and that's mentioned here. Right? We have all these Brahmana ladies. So what are they doing here? They're reciting prayers. They're bringing gifts for the deities. So they're bringing, just like we see here at New Goloka, we have so many Brahmin ladies who come all the time and bring gifts, right? Like we have Shama Kishori, who spends like 4 hours picking jasmine. You know how small jasmine flowers are? Everybody knows how small jasmine flowers are? And you see on Srila Prabhupada that jasmine garland? So imagine for each tier, how many jasmine flowers are in each tier. There must be like 10 flowers on each tier. And she's spending sometimes 5 to 10 hours picking the jasmines and making the garlands and bringing them. And then when she comes to cook on Sunday, she brings all the boga from her home. She doesn't use the temple boga, so she's bringing boga from her home and cooking here. And we find many other, she's particularly exemplary. I hope she's listening. I hope you're listening. And we also have many other Brahmin ladies who regularly come right and bring flowers for the deities, or bring different boga for the deities, or incense and oils and other paraphernalia. Right? And then they're leading, as Srila Prabhupada says, they're leading Rukmini in the prayers, and they're teaching her how to do the worship. Again, sometimes we have people who say that, well, all worship is done by men. The women aren't involved in the worship. And even there's one book I'm reading by a so-called scientist where she's saying that if women and Shudras engage in deity worship, it'll mess up their vibrational energy and it'll make them sick and they won't be able to function. I'm trying to understand what the other side is saying and what their basis is of saying it. So, but we find this is not true in the Shastra, that 5,000 years ago, there were Brahmana women who were reciting these mantras. This concept that, the women can't recite the Vedic mantras, that's not a fact. When Srila Prabhupada first gave the Sampradaya and Gayatri mantras to ladies in Boston, so in his lecture, he said that although women generally weren't given the thread, they were given the mantras. And of course, the mantra itself, which we'll get to in a moment with the demigoddesses, is a woman. The Gayatri mantra herself is actually a lady. So this was our tradition in the Ramayana. It says that Sita was performing Sandhya Vadana, which in order to do that, you have to chant the mantras. So we find these Brahmana ladies were actually Brahmanas, although they're explained here as Dvija Patnya. They're the wives of Brahmanas. It's not just that they were some kind of appendage of a Brahmana, but they themselves were actually Brahmanas. What happened gradually is that this became twisted. Things change over time. Krishna says, Yada yada hi dharmasya glani bhavati bharata abhutanam adharmasya tadatmanam srajamyaham. Things become polluted. Things become twisted. And things have to be restored. And we see that Srila Prabhupada is restoring. It's very interesting when Prabhupada was giving these mantras to ladies in Boston, he specifically said, I am restoring the Vedic system. He did not say, I'm instituting something new for all of you Westerners who just can't handle the Vedic. That's not what he said. And people speculate that that's what he was doing. And even I've heard people say, well, we don't know why Prabhupada did this. And my answer is, well, he said why he did it in that lecture. And Srila Prabhupada engaged his women as Brahmanas, his second initiated women as Brahmanas. He engaged his women in doing fire yagyas, in installing deities. He engaged Yamuna in installing deities in India. The authorities on deity worship when Prabhupada was here were Shilavati and Yamuna, both ladies. Prabhupada didn't give them a title of minister of deity worship. I think the only ministry he established was education. But they were the authorities on deity worship. If you had any question, anything about deity worship, you would ask Shilavati or Yamuna. He told Saradya, you were talking the other day, I think, about Saradya. He told Saradya to perform the fire yagya and give the Gayatri mantras to her husband on his behalf. So Srila Prabhupada was saying that he was doing this because this was tradition and this was in the Shastra. All right, now we have a section here, and I spent about an hour of my own personal research and another hour researching with a Sanskrit scholar yesterday to try to figure out what this Vada Mukhya, who are these Vara Mukhya? So in the BBT translation here, it says that these were, Mukhya means what? Anyone know what Mukhya means? Face or chief. Like if we'll say the head of the room, right? So the face of the room, the head of the room. So these are chief somebodies. And although Srila Prabhupada puts the thousands with the Brahmin wives, if you scroll up to the Sanskrit, so you'll see that it's by the thousands, Vara Mukhyaha, Sahasrasha, and then the Dvija Patnya is further down. So it's also likely that these thousands refer to the Varamukyaha rather than to the Brahmanas. And the BBT translation is putting the thousands with the Varamukyaha, and Prabhupada in Krishna book is putting the thousands with the Brahmanas. So there were thousands of somebody. So who are these Varamukyaha? Now there's only one other place where this occurs in the Bhagavatam, and that's in the first canto where Prabhupada does translate this as the chief of the prostitutes. And there he talks about such persons welcoming Krishna to Dwarka. And he has, in the purport, he explains about how in Dwarka that there were prostitutes and that a person may, by bad fortune, get an occupation that's not very wonderful in society, but still they could be devotees of the Lord. So he does give that, and it is one of the listings in the Sanskrit dictionary, so it can be understood in that way. However, that's not the only way it can be understood. The word vada, and it's just not vada. Vada means a benediction, but vada can mean time or day or what's common, what's in the general, like general people. And that's how Srila Sanatana Goswami is commenting on this, that this Vada Mukyaha means the best among the general citizens. Now that translation makes a lot of sense in this context, because we already have in the previous verse, we have the Kshatriya ladies. And in this verse, we have the Brahmana ladies. So who's left? The Vaishya and Shudra ladies. These are the general population. The Kshatriyas and the Brahmanas are always in a minority in the population. So these would be the best of the lady citizens in the society. Now, especially under Muslim rule, women in general were often thought of as unchaste. There was like this general mentality of the Muslims. So we have to take that into consideration. Another thing we might consider is how in the Shastra a lack of chastity was understood. For example, Srila Prabhupada refers to Bilva Mangala Thakur's girlfriend as a prostitute. And there's a place where he says, you say girlfriend, we say prostitute. And it's not that clear. Certainly, this is not talking about like drug addict streetwalkers. It's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about those kind of women are following Rukmini to the temple, bringing that would be very incongruous. Yes? It just absolutely would not make sense in context here. So who were these people? Well, these could have been the best among the general women in the citizenry. The best businesswomen, the best artisans, the best dancers, the best craftswomen, and so forth. That could be what it meant. It could also mean women who were what we would call more independent women. You know, courtesans often are attached just to one man, but they're not married to him. And so these women exist, of course, as part of the royal household and as part of society. I was thinking in our modern society, you may be familiar with the famous actress Katharine Hepburn. So she was a courtesan. She was attached to one man who was married to another woman and had 3 children by the other woman. But she was very well known as being associated with that man. And in fact, when the man died, she got more condolences than the wife. So this is, we have people like that in modern society. And we certainly have in modern society very, very famous, well-known, prominent, influential women who have a series of boyfriends. Yes? We won't name names, but yes? I'm sure everybody can think of such women in society that by Vedic standards would be considered unchaste. But they're very prominent members of society. Is everybody following what I'm saying? They're very prominent, they're very influential members of society, although they're not in a exactly proper relationship. And we have people like that who have great influence in the arts, great influence in business, great influence in politics. In all spheres, we have women like that. And it's entirely possible that there were women like that as well in Vedic times, and that these women were so much accepted by society that they'd be going with the princess to the temple, bringing gifts, and that they may have been there in the thousands. So we have sometimes this very narrow view of what is a Vedic woman, how did Vedic women live, but obviously there was a wide range. And then finally we're going to go to the goddess, Durga. So, of course, our Vedic canon says there's one God, but there's many, many demigods who assist the Lord, and one can pray to these demigods as Vaishnavas. Durga is also called Vaishnavi. Yes, she is the sister of the Lord, and she's actually quite, she's managing the whole material world. I mean, talk about a manager and a leader. Shristi Siti Pralaya Sadhana Shaktireka Chayeva Yasya Bhuvanani Bhivarti Durga Ichchani Rupam Api Yasya Chitestate Sa Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. She's managing the whole material world. She's extremely powerful. She comes also as Kali on a tiger, and she's killing the demons. And she's a servant of the Lord. We have Simantini in Mayapur at the Jagannath temple, where Durga is worshiping Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and meditating on Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So one should not go to the demigods as a way of bypassing the Lord. Prabhupada talks about this as just lust. He says it's lust to get something undue, that by our karma, by the will of the Lord, there's something that we don't have, and we think, well, if I go to one of the demigods, I'll get it. You know, kids do this in a family, like mommy says no, so they go to daddy, or daddy says no, and then they go to mommy, and they try to circumvent, right? And good parents, they'll say, you know, the mother will say, so what did your father say, or what did your mother say? And they don't allow this kind of thing. Or kids will go to the grandparents, right? I was once in a home where the kids were eating like lollipops on the sofa, and the parents said to the visiting grandparent, we don't allow our children to eat on the sofa, what to speak of sticky things. And she said, well, I'm the grandmother. I can spoil the children as I like, which I thought, I'm not going to be that kind of a grandmother. I'm going to respect my children's wishes for how they want to raise their children. But children will do that. They'll go to the grandmother, they'll go to the auntie, they'll go to the uncle, and let me get something that my parents don't allow. Let me kind of try to circumvent, right? So people will do that. There's a government law, but they'll go to some officer, they'll go to someone in an office and give them a bribe, and will you do something that's outside of the law? And Prabhupada says the demigod worship is generally like that. And the demigods have some ability to do that. Just like, you know, a person working in an office, they have some leeway that they can say, this just happened to me actually, that someone had purchased a ticket for me in basic economy, which meant I didn't have a seat and I was in the last boarding group, and, you know. And then I was trying to check in, and I called the airlines and I said, I can't properly check in, I don't have a seat. Oh, that's because you have basic economy. I said, well, I didn't realize that. I said, someone else bought my ticket. Oh, someone else bought your ticket? Oh, okay. We'll give you a seat and I'll put you in a higher boarding group. I'm like, okay. So, you know, she was breaking the rules, but she has some leeway. So the demigods have some leeway like that. That they can kind of say, well, yeah, you have that karma, but if you've pleased me, I'll arrange this. And of course, Krishna really gets on Lord Brahma's case about doing this kind of thing. He says, don't give these demons these benedictions. It ends up being very troublesome for me. Right? Lord Brahma's giving, no, you won't die in the day or the night or the inside or the outside or by any living being or not living being or by any weapon or, you know, on the land, the sea, or the sky. And then, you know, Lord Nrsingadev, he's able, of course, to kill him, but he says to Lord Brahma, this is a problem. Don't do this kind of thing. He says this to Lord Shiva also with Vitrasura or Vrikasura. With Vrikasura, he says, you know, don't give demons these kind of benedictions where I have to come as a little brahmachari and say, why don't you try putting your hand on your own head? But the demigods can do this kind of thing, and so people think, yeah, I did some bad karma and I did some bad things, so I have this problem. But instead of just tatenu kampam sukshamikshamano, let me see if I can do an end run. Or they see these demigods as being, that there's many, many gods, that there's not just one God. And the argument against this is given by the Yamadutas in the 6th canto. They said there cannot be many gods with equal power. Because just like we know that if we have a group of people making decisions, it's very hard to make decisions. If we have a group of people and they all have equal power to make decisions, it's very, very hard to make decisions. And the Yamadutas say, one God will say, punish this person, and the other God will say, don't punish this person. And then the person either gets first punished and then rewarded, or, it's all a mess. There has to be one final decider. So these demigods are not competitors. It's not like there's a devil that has equal power with God and, they're fighting it out and God's just going, oh no, now the devil's caused an earthquake. What am I going to do? It's not this kind of a situation. And so only less intelligent people worship these demigods. However, even great devotees like Rukmini or like the gopis may worship the demigods as part of their devotion to Krishna. Like when Kuvera asked Dhruva, what do you want? I want devotion to Krishna. I want to marry Krishna. I want to be able to serve Krishna. Now, please help me serve Krishna. And approaching the demigods like that is not that different from approaching Guru. One is approaching the demigods as a Vaishnava, that by the blessings of the Vaishnava, we can get the blessings of Krishna. And of course, all the sampradayas are started, right? We have the Lakshmi Sampradaya and the Shiva Sampradaya and the Kumara Sampradaya and the Brahma Sampradaya. Ultimately, our guru is a demigod. And these demigods are also, many of them are also female. They're not all male. Right? We have Gayatri, who's a demigoddess. We have Saraswati. We have Durga Devi. And so Vedic society was not off-kilter. It wasn't a society that was off balance. It wasn't a racist, sexist society. It wasn't an unfair society. It wasn't an exploitive society. Of course, there were exploitive people in Vedic society. I mean, there are always going to be exploitive people in the material world. There were demons in Vedic society. I mean, all kinds of things that went on that weren't proper, with Jarasandha kidnapping all those kings and so forth. But the general standard in society was that the women were respected and they had places as prominent citizens and as guides and as leaders in society. So questions, comments, corrections, chastisements, arguments? Yes? Yeah, some of the kshatriyas would actually go into battle. There is quite a number of examples in Indian history of powerful kshatriyas who won battles. Yeah. That example is given with Kaikeyi. Subhadra also drives a chariot when Arjuna kidnaps her. But yeah, they also knew military. There's no question that they knew military arts, and sometimes they would fight. Although it couldn't have been the general thing, because like Bhishma said, he wouldn't fight against a woman. And even, our genuine trans Sekandi, he said, he was born a woman and I'm not going to fight him. So obviously that wasn't the general rule, but it did happen. Yes, Marish? Women wrestling tournaments, yeah. That's interesting. So the women having wrestling tournaments at Raivataka Hill in the Yadu Dynasty. Yeah. Somewhere. Okay. Yeah, we somehow try to superimpose this 1950s stereotype that, Vedic. No, 1950s, really. Because in the 1850s, you still didn't have full industrialization. And before full industrialization, women having careers was the norm all over the world. So once industrialization moved careers out of the home is when you had this crisis happen for women, that they had to choose between home and career. That didn't happen. Pre-industrialized society, that was, everybody had home and career. I mean, if you were extremely wealthy and didn't have to work, you would still do things for the benefit of society. But yeah, this idea that women just have, 1.8 kids and eat chocolates and watch soap operas is not, and play card games. That's all they do. That's, that's not like, that's not really the concept. Anything else? Yeah, Justipu was saying how the Christians have saints and this idea of going through an intermediary, yes. Well, what's the no. There's the Shiites and the Sunni and Shiite. Which one of them accepts Muhammad's family? The Shiites. Descendants, so they do. And then the Sunnis don't. But they won't allow you to have like pictures of these persons. That's forbidden. Like the Orthodox Jews, they will have pictures of rabbis. They definitely go through rabbis. I mean, the Jews will say, well, we don't accept like Moses as an intermediary, but they're definitely going through the commentaries of their rabbis and their scholars, so that concept is there. And of course, I mean, everyone is going through like a minister or a priest or an imam or a rabbi or somebody is acting as a kind of intermediary. Yes, they do. They do, although I'm much more familiar with Judaism, Christianity, and Buddhism than I am with Islam. I'm not as familiar with Islam. I'd have to ask some of our, PhDs in religion that question, but I know they do. Yeah. Yeah, she is. She's managing the world. But she's managing as his assistant. Vishnu's managing, but she's managing as his assistant. Maybe he's the CEO and she's the COO. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki jai.